Hi, my name is Heather Henderson. I work at Trail Estates Winery out in Prince Edward County. And some do's and don'ts when you're going out to taste wine. Well, I guess I'll start with some don'ts. Don't rush. Just enjoy yourselves, take your time at each winery, enjoy the wine. And also try not to wear heavy perfume or no perfume at all is better because you're going to be evaluating the wine when you're going out. Some things to do when you are some do's, I guess, would be to ask questions. Ask lots of questions. The tasting room staff is here to answer the questions as best you can, or as we can, sorry. And if we don't have the answer, we can always pop over and talk to another associate or the winemaker and grab the answer there. And just enjoy yourself. Just have a good time when you're out.
Welcome to Flying for Flavor. This is your host, Stephanie Pichet, and Deke and I are alone today.
Hey, guys.
Just for the summer, it's one of those things that it's like a revolving door in this studio, depending on who happens to be in town and when, because everyone's got their own lives, and we're busy eating and drinking and on the road, because that's what you do during the summer, right?
Absolutely.
Just before we get started today, you're going to hear a lot of little clips here and there. Norm is actually being our roving reporter this week. Him and his friend Dan are actually down in Prince Edward County, and so they went and interviewed different workers in tasting rooms at different wineries just to get their feedback and their tips for all of you listeners about tasting room etiquette and things you should do and don't do. And as a thank you, I went to the LCBO, and the only winery... there's only two wineries that participated today that actually have wines available in the LCBO, and it is Clausen Chase and Stanners Vineyard. Stanners Vineyard, they just haven't restocked at the LCBOs, or there's nothing here remotely for me to go and get. But I did manage to pick up, I think, one of the last bottles in Sudbury of the Clausen Chase 2014 Vineyard Chardonnay. So that's it's a great one for the summer. It's a little heavier. This is a food pairing wine, by the way. So as compared to the Cool Climate Chardonnays that we talked about in a previous episode, which especially anything that doesn't have any aging on it, which is very light and crisp, those are the styles that usually non-Chardonnay drinkers tend to prefer. But if you happen to like that big buttery Chardonnay style, this Clausen Chardonnay is actually a really great one.
Cool.
So, what have you been up to, Deke? I haven't seen you in a while.
I've been on my motorcycle, man.
Yes, if you haven't seen that video that we posted to the Facebook page, that was a lot of fun. I'm hoping he's going to do more of those.
Yeah.
Obviously that you haven't gotten off that thing since you got it, right?
Well, actually, I sold that one. No. I sold that one already. Yeah,
you just had
story.
It was, oh my God.
So I'm writing another one right now, and then I'm looking for another one soon. So it all comes down to more power. Eventually,
okay. Yeah. So Norm's gone through all this stuff. So if he was in town today, I'm sure he'd love to be able to chat with you and kind of tell you about all the ins and outs. And he's
absolutely
he's driven most different styles. And the interesting thing is that he started off with speed was his thing.
Right.
Also back in the days, I don't know if they still call them crotch rockets.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah.
So yes, he was all about the speed at first, and he's finding that as he's getting older. He's more about the relaxation part of the ride.
Which is ironically, that's where I'm starting off. Is just riding cool and just enjoying the ride. Mm-hmm. And that's to me, that's the most liberating component of the whole experience. Mm-hmm. Is that, and the speed. To tell you the truth, I'm scared shitless of these machines. So I mean, I have a motor between. I'm already crazy a lot enough. So I have a motor between my legs now. I have to really respect that. You know, it's something where the speed I'm not taking for granted at all. You know, on the highways I'm beating the speed limits and etc. And actually that little clip that I made to Lil Current, that was my first
big out of town run.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So I had a destination. I chose the trough, and that's how the episode just kind of last.
Well, there you go. Over the next couple of weeks, as you're doing other little ones.
Yeah.
Basically, you'll have to follow on the Facebook page to see where Deke goes next.
Ultimately, by next summer, I would like to be able to go check out like the food truck festivals. Well, I might be there myself, but on a motorcycle to go more down south, be able to be comfortable on the 400 series, on the 401, and to do all those festivals down south.
I think you find it a lot So it's just a matter of the more time you spend on the bike, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I've sort of noticed too. That from people I've talked to, that especially if they haven't ridden in a while, right? It's just getting back in that routine and starting feeling confidence on the road. Because nothing is worse than a driver who lacks confidence, whether it's in a vehicle or a motorcycle. That's what makes me nervous. I can always tell the person who's gripping onto those. Yeah,
especially if you're driving around them. Everyone, it's like tension. Everyone feels it. Everyone knows, right? I mean, if there's a certain way that you're gripping a motorcycle, it's like, oh, I'm gonna change lanes. Slow down a little bit, change lanes. Yeah,
exactly.
There's like the kind of the level of exclusivity and kind of one must have a pedigree, one must have training. Hold your glass this way. Oh, don't, make sure you swirl it. Oh, don't hold the glass like that, because it's like, please, people can just come in and try the wine, and don't be afraid. Don't the kind of rules about wine tasting can be, I think, a barrier to enjoyment. And so the only instruction I give to people is take 2 sips. No matter what the wine is that you're tasting, take at least 2 sips before you judge whether you like it or not. And that's the only instruction I'll give people, because I want it to be an accessible, free of snobbery. There's a lot of snobbery and a lot of there's a lot of expertise in wine drinking, and one can spend a lifetime learning about it, because all the complexities are really fascinating, and I love it. I've got passion about it. But yeah, that's what to do when you go into a wine tasting. Don't feel ashamed that you're not an expert, because it takes a lifetime to learn. And B, take 2 sips.
So you excited about Buck of Beer?
Yeah, mixed feelings toward the whole. I'm excited towards it. I mean, I've, to tell you the truth, kind of cut down on the beer a lot, and especially this summer has just been, I've just been really feeling it. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I agree with the concept. Because I mean, from the political standpoint, I don't know if you're ready to talk about that, but the bucket beer thing, I mean, it's cool. It'll appease it's targeted exactly where Doug Ford wants to go, right? I mean, because ultimately the poorer bracket is who's going to suffer under his party, I find. Mm-hmm. So he's like doing something to win, something big to win over the entire crowd. Almost, I feel like something else is coming that's going to impede on the lower bracket.
Correct. Usually that's kind of how it goes, right? So they try to balance things out, or they try to do something nice, and they did promise that. Yeah. And he kept using that whole Buck of Beer as his big claim to fame, so that he felt like now he's going to show win, even though he's had, a few public setbacks or people who are, railing against some of his changes that he started off with right away. Yeah. This Buck of Beer thing, he thought was going to appease people. Right. So for those of you who are listening who don't know the whole background on this, so the interesting part is that if you are not a big beer drinker, don't buy beer often, the base minimum price that a brewery of any size can charge for a beer is $1.25. So now that he's changing this Buck of Beer, essentially a 6-pack, you are saving $1.50, and then it is only if the brewery decides to go that low. Mm-hmm. So yes, you may see the occasional sales, but the only companies that are really going to be able to afford to do something like that are the ones who make mass quantities of beer. So those are going to be your Molson, Labatt's, the big players. Right. Almost every craft brewer that I've talked to, messaged online, they are all saying there is no way they're going to start cheapening out on their process just so that they can compete price-wise. Right. So if we're all excited about this whole Buck of Beer process, and and hopefully not just voting Conservative in Ontario because you wanted a Buck of Beer. Hope that wasn't your only reason. If that was your only reason, unfortunately, you're not going to see very much in a way of price change, I think, in the next little while, which is unfortunate. But if anything, it just puts a spotlight on all the breweries and, you know, especially the craft brewers.
I mean, they could try it. It could offer fair competition. I mean, you know, you could have some microbreweries coming out with a pilot for cheaper beers or whatever the case, just to gain the attention. Like, there's some room for a lot of positivity in this. I think
there can be. I have not heard one person yet who said anything positive about it within the industry.
Yeah.
So I think, and the only thing I can think of is that those who are trying to figure out how to capitalize on this marketing wise, they're not saying anything yet.
Yeah.
Because people are kind of laughing at the whole prospect.
I mean, the taxes are still massive. You can't take that away, right? I mean, there are alcohol taxes.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and that comes from government too. So, I mean, I think if that were to happen more on a global scale, I think to appease the majority of everyone, I think that's more of a common sense move. But this was the political play. You know, he had his target market and.
Well, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, like this 25-cent bottle difference is really not going to stop people from driving across the border to Costco in Quebec to go and get their beer.
Tell you the truth, Stephanie, I'm not excited to taste beer that costs $1.
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
I'm not. It's like it's like if they did the same thing for hamburgers, you think who would want to eat a hamburger that cost $1?
Well, we used to at one point.
We used to when it was fair. But I mean, now that the price of meat went, like I know how much the price of meat went up, and I know that it's probably not meat in there for $1.
Meat-ish.
Meat-ish, yeah, exactly. Meat-ish flavor.
That's my new term for the summer. Is I put an ish on the end of anything that's questionable.
Of which, have you tried the new no meat burger from A&W?
I can't believe you're bringing that up.
Yeah.
I am so addicted. You have no idea.
Are you really?
I am.
Do you realize that for all the vegan population who are so excited about this, that it's grilled on the same flesh-ridden juice, beef juicy?
Oh yeah,
griddle?
I was not, and that's the whole thing. I was not looking at this as a vegan thing because I am. You know,
as a health
animal
choice,
rights.
right?
For me, it wasn't even just a health choices. Right. Yes, it is partly because I always like to cut back on the amount of meat. Right. But as much as I've tried veggie burgers from all the different chains and restaurants and everything over the years, they're all pretty much the same as the ones you get in the grocery store. Yeah. So there was never much of a motivation. And just the quality of this in comparison, I do say it's much better. But no, if you're a vegan, don't think that you are basically saving the planet by doing this.
Well, it's funny because yesterday I was grocery shopping and I ran into another culinary friend of mine who's strict vegan, and she just finished having one maybe 20 minutes before I bumped into her. We were at the Walmart in the South End, and she said she spit it out because it was too close. It was too close to meat, and it disgusted her.
She's not used to the texture.
She's completely vegan. So I mean, maybe I haven't personally tried it, but maybe it is that close.
It is that close, and that's one of the reasons that I like it.
Yeah,
and it's because okay, just to give you an example. So I'm trying to do this because you're only hearing as opposed to seeing me. But you know how when you make a proper burger with no fillers, so no egg, breadcrumb, or anything else, so just 100% beef, and it kind of falls apart. It's light and that's what this is like. This plant protein based. Wow. So it still has that kind of juicy, flaky texture to it that you wouldn't get from a veggie burger where they have to glue it together with other things. Right. So, and that's what it feels like. And so between that, lettuce, tomato, mayo, I don't bother putting cheese or anything on it. So it's a veganish.
Right. See, I'm anxious to actually try it. My dad's a vegetarian, pescatarian.
Yep.
And I've through my days, I've tried a lot of different veggie burgers. Salmon burgers, I can't stand, but just a variation. Some of them are more cardboardish than others, and I've just never like veggie burger. Okay, cool, I get it. Some of them are better than others, but this one I'm looking forward to trying, especially now that my vegan friend said he was way too close and she couldn't. Which is the irony because it's meant to appease that crowd, but it is for people who just want a healthier option. Yeah.
And I don't think there was very few of us dedicated souls who would still order a classic veggie burger. Right. I mean, the original A&W veggie burger wasn't bad. Right. But this one just puts it over the top. Beautiful. And the interesting thing is, it is the only place in all of Canada that you'll be able to get it, or A&W drive-thrus, or A&W restaurants. Really? Cool. So it's really big in the States. There's a lot of big chains. You can get it in grocery stores down there, I believe, like in little 4-packs to make it home. Yeah. But A&W was the first one to bring it in.
Very cool. I'm glad they did.
Yep. So now you know. Hit the drive-thru this week.
Cool.
Please bring back all your glassware. And please don't ask me to pour more wine into your tasting. What else?
Try to be concise and clear about what you like and don't like so we can give you good recommendations. If you feel like you've received really great service from a tasting room associate, then it is appropriate to leave a tip.
Yes.
All right, tasting room etiquette. I wanted to bring it up partly because I just came from a couple of trips to different wineries. I've been to breweries and distilleries and similar places in the last little while. And I know that harvest season's coming up, both for wineries as well as for cideries. Of course, apples are going to be coming in season. And usually just around before school starts, everyone tries to get in that last road trip to go out and do something before the summer's over. And usually in Ontario, especially, a lot of these destinations are places everyone wants to go. So if you've never gone before, and Deke, you mentioned that you had never gone to a tasting room before. So I thought this was a good way to get you ready. So now you can take your bike.
Yeah.
You know what? You can. You don't have to go all the way down to Toronto.
Yeah.
No, but you can go and you can go and spend the night.
Yeah, I could do that.
So for people who don't realize, even if you're up in here in Northern Ontario, you only have to go as far as the Barrie Collingwood area.
Right.
So there are some wineries that have started there.
Cool.
There are tons of cideries. So if you love ciders, like dry ciders and everything else, there's tons of them there.
Okay.
I think there's like 8 or 9, something crazy like that.
Wow.
So you can get wine, you can get cider. There's a couple of breweries in that area, all in that Muskoka area. And then if you want to go around by Grand Bend, I can't remember the name of the winery now. Oh my goodness, Mark Pister's the winemaker's gonna kick me because we were just talking about it in the other episode. But there is a winery in Grand Bend. I will put it in the show notes. That makes some spectacular wines. It's some of his favorites, and there's a really big Chardonnay there that I'm trying to get Norm to. I was supposed to order some in for him, and I will do that right after I tape this show, actually. But there's a lot that are just in that area, so you don't have to go off the 400.
Okay.
So
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
So it might be a little destination. You got a few weeks.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah,
work
I
up to
do.
it.
I do.
You can up to it.
That's
so
true.
a couple of things that you're going to hear. As I said, there's going to be little clips throughout this episode of different tips offered directly from the people who work in the tasting rooms at wineries. So they see it all. They see the groups and the do's and the don'ts. So a couple of the same themes kind of popped up. You're going to hear a lot about fragrance. And I didn't realize about how... I know that even offices, and there's a lot of places now that are supposed to be fragrance free. There's a lot of people who suffer from allergies from it. But from a wine tasting perspective, you're supposed to be using all your senses when you're tasting wine. And if you've just overloaded yourself with, your latest French perfume, or if you're one of those guys that still sprays himself head to toe with Axe body spray,
Just to say Axe. Yeah.
right? This is not the time to start going out and picking up chicks, and this is not going to impress anybody.
Right.
It's not only going to
Distract.
basically kill any olfactory sense of the other people in that tasting room, but you're not going to get any enjoyment out of it either.
Makes sense.
So this would be one of those times where don't wearing anything fragrant would be a good rule of thumb. If you're planning to go with a large group, there are some wineries, same thing with breweries or whatever, that are used to large groups. You'll see on their websites, if you do a little bit of research ahead of time, that will talk about groups available, great destination for bachelorette parties, or they'll say there's parking for buses. As soon as it mentions parking for buses, there's going to be large groups there. There are certain wineries and certain wine regions, I'm not going to go and name names, that I know from experience that they are all about the bus groups that going in.
Right.
So I don't go there. Because the odds of, as soon as I see a bus, I will actually bypass that one particular winery.
Okay.
Because the odds of you getting a tasting in when a big bus group comes in there is just not going to happen. Same thing with big limousines.
Or stopping at a McDonald's.
Yeah, big limousine, right? There are all of these larger vehicles. That's a big sign that there's going to be large groups of them. You will also see, if you see large groups of... usually it's girls. You'll get large groups of ladies all on bikes doing the bike tours.
Right.
And they all come in together. And because you can drink and bicycle at the same time, sometimes they're weeble wobbling, but it means that they're going to take their time and enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
So you need to let the winery know, or just check and make sure that they're a place that does accept groups. If you've never been there before, some tasting rooms are very small.
Okay.
So you showing up with 10, 12 people right, on a Saturday afternoon when it's already busy and you're expecting all of you and your friends to get served at the same time, you might be either waiting too long or something. Letting them know that here's our plan, we're kind of coming in around this time, is that a good time? I've had some wineries actually tell me that, you know what, it's going to be really busy then. If you can go this place first and then come here afterwards later in the afternoon, I'll be able to spend more time with you. Cool. So just by checking with them, a lot of times if you just message them directly through Facebook, like through the wineries directly, same thing with, again, I keep saying wineries because that's what we're referring to today, but the same thing happens for breweries who have tasting rooms or distilleries who have tasting rooms. Exactly the same process. Cool. So just letting them know ahead of time that you're coming really makes it easier for them so they can prepare accordingly.
That's a great tip.
And the other thing is, speaking of large groups, kids. So first of all, kids get bored silly in there, but if you happen to be down there touring around, I know my brother drags his kids to all the tasting rooms when he goes and travels, but his kids are a little bit older, so it's not as bad. But just keep in mind that you are in a facility that has a lot of glass, not just glassware, but bottles. So keeping an eye on your kids, making sure that they're not underfoot, knocking somebody over who has glass and wine in their hand, making sure they don't run behind the counter, which seems to have happened many times. A lot of these places do have like yards and picnic tables and things like that outside, especially if it's a nice day. This is a great opportunity to sit with the kids outside. Let them run around or whatever, and you sit down and take your time enjoying the wines, right? So you can have a good time with the family, but just kind of pick and choose your places. Absolutely. There's some places that are very geared towards family things. So I would recommend some of those. And then, so those are kind of things to prepare yourself in advance. And then once you get there, just like there are people I've mentioned previously that I don't like Chardonnay and I don't want any Chardonnays, right? Have you ever tried this Chardonnay from this particular winery? Maybe not. Right. I've even though I have tried a lot of the different wines, I never say no when someone offers me, hey, well, how about you try this one? Right. They'll ask me questions. Well, what do you like? Right. I bet you we have one that's going to appeal to you. So just being a little open-minded without having any preconceived notions of what this place is going to be like. Or if the wines are cheap, then the wine's going to taste cheap. You don't know that until you've actually tried them.
And I've always, this is a little off topic, but when I have like a hummus tasting booth, people are like, oh, I don't like hummus. You know, it's because often it could be that they've tried something, you know, that has a 90-day expiry date and it's pasty and it's the texture they don't like, or something from a box store or whatever the case. It just kind of, it's almost like the same thing, isn't it?
It is. It just has to do with being an open mind, and not every single thing tastes the same. And it doesn't always taste the same to different people. Yeah. So if your spouse does not like a certain wine from a certain winery and you happen to be going there, don't automatically assume that you're going to taste the same thing that they are. Right. Everyone's palates are different. Yes. So I just knowing that, because Norm and I usually choose different wines. The other thing is, if you don't happen to like a wine, making icky sounds and screwing up your face and like moaning and groaning about how awful this is, rolling your eye, and then making a big show of dumping it in the spit bucket. Rude. Nobody there needs to know. And that would be the same idea as if you went to a restaurant, right? If you don't like the food, you don't like the food. Or if it wasn't like what you ordered, that's fine. No, exactly. Some of these tastings are costing next to nothing. They're basically just covering their costs for the tasting fee that they're charging you. So just being a little bit courteous about, if you don't like it, you just slide it across and ask for something else. Right. And there are always these magic buckets that are usually on every single tasting bar. Okay. If there's not, just ask for one, and that is for you. You don't have to drink the entire pour that they give you. Okay. So as opposed to here, where I kind of like, don't waste the wine. If I'm pouring you a sample, it is for you to taste it. If you want to drink the whole thing, that's great. Nobody looks at you sideways if you don't want to finish it and you want to dump it and get on to the next tasting. If you have it in your mouth and you're not quite sure about it, you can also spit the wine into that bucket. And that I didn't know. Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of spitting that happens in wine tasting. That's funny. Some people are a little bit more classy about it than others, but there's a lot of spitting that happens in wine. I'll talk about the tasting events later, because some of it's actually kind of funny. So now when it comes to your wine knowledge, there's a lot of people that hesitate about sharing the fact that they're not big wine knows. Right. Meaning that, well, I know my difference between red and white, and I'm scared to ask for, I'm scared to ask what kind of grape this is,
Yeah,
or any silly question. No questions are
Well,
silly.
and that's the whole point about it, right? Is to go in and learn.
It is.
I mean, to keep a studious mentality and go in and
And they want to teach you. They want to show you a little bit about what they're making. And I mean, you got to think about it, that most wine producers and winemakers, they're essentially farmers. They're growing grapes and then turning it into this art form that's turning into a bottle.
Absolutely.
So it's a matter of appreciating the art that goes behind it, their process. They're excited to tell you about it. Their entire team that's there is usually pumped to tell you about it. They want to show you all the different things that they're making. So let them show you, right? Cool. But if you happen to know a lot about wine, it's one thing to agree with somebody or ask a very knowledgeable question about the winemaking process, which kind of shows that you have a little bit of winemaking. But I've stood behind some guy who is taking up the girl's time behind the tasting bar, and he's just basically rhyming off things that he read online because he's very proud of the fact that he knows all these things. Right. But she doesn't get a chance to ask anything. She doesn't get a chance to say anything. He's basically there to trying to teach her. Okay. Right? Mm-hmm. And we're really proud of you, but you're holding up the show. This is not that kind of a place.
No, exactly.
So just kind of, move it along. And it kind of just makes other people who may not be as knowledgeable nearby kind of feel dumb. Mm-hmm. And they'll be scared to ask questions because they don't know as much as this guy. So kind of keep your wine knowledge in check to a certain extent.
Cool.
But there's other people who actually take it to the point where they pretend that they're working in the industry, right? That they're, they assume that they're going to get discounts or special treatment if they work in the industry. Right. So they start hammering off things and trying to talk about themselves, hoping that someone's going to give them free tastings, free this, free that. Sometimes it's very obvious when they are and they're not. So if you do actually work in the industry, they'll be able to tell based on how you behave and how you handle yourself in the room.
Sure.
So just respecting the people behind the tasting bar, respecting the winemaker, tasting everything that's given to you, asking appropriate questions. You can show that you're part of the industry without actually having to wear it on a t-shirt, essentially.
I think I get lots of people, and this is probably just me because I don't have the best memory, and this is like my only 4 months of experience in the service industry. But people will have like a group of people coming. Oh yeah, like, I'll have this, and this, and then they'll all be like, I have this, and I'm like, okay, let's just do one at a time because I'm not doing all three of what all of you want.
I think my thing is that when you have a lot of people in here, I find people don't know how to share the tasting bar. So they'll come in. So it's different for you guys right now because it's just you guys. But if another group sometimes come in, some people don't know how to move over in order to help, so that they can still have their little space over here, but to allow other people to come in. So I think sometimes it's being maybe aware of your surroundings because some people won't do that. So
I think sometimes people just want to wait their turn, but really you could be waiting a long time if there's 10 other people who come in. So
let's say
just tell them, come on up. I'm just we just moved out here and come over here.
I think that'd be the one thing. But I have to say overall, most people are really nice and genuine. So I think we get a couple of the chosen few that are not the nicest people you want to be serving.
So I mentioned talking about spitting. So you don't have to spit things out over time, but if you happen to really enjoy the wine, the opposite is true. You can also just completely finish it.
Right.
I've actually sat there and made my husband wait because I really enjoyed the wine and I was not leaving until my glass was done.
Right.
I have it to do with responsibility. We were talking about being on the bike and you don't drink when you are on your bike.
Never.
But same thing with drinking and driving. You need to either prearrange for transportation. Being that person that comes stumbling into the winery makes everybody nervous.
Right.
It's not fun to serve it. It's one thing if you're having a good time, but it's another thing when you're basically being dangerous by hopping back into a vehicle that you're. There's a lot of Ubers, ride-sharing services. There's car service businesses that are down there.
Right.
There's a lot of places that will arrange and help you arrange a ride if you make the plans ahead of time, or you just find that one friend who's really not a big wine drinker to drive you around. That's always fun to have. I think that people should have an entire Facebook page if they're not wine drinkers, and then you'll make lots of friends with people who they'll invite you everywhere. You get free travel if you could be a DD. And then another thing I want to talk about had to do with those same people besides the industry asking for the good stuff. In other words, they want to bypass the pouring routine of the people who are behind the tasting bar.
Okay.
So if there is a classic wine that's their flagship wine, they want you to try that first. It's not because they're trying to give you the more inexpensive stuff and holding back the better stuff. It is usually because this is our benchmark. This is what we do well. We want you to try this or these wines first, and then your palate will be accustomed to our style. And then when we show you, here is the bigger stuff. Here is the more aged. Here is the better of the picks of grapes. Here's the better of the production. You're going to appreciate it more, and you're going to see what that winemaker was trying to do. So there's a reason that they're doing it, and they're not just trying to cut down on everyone drinking all the more expensive stuff.
When you go, you see these places in the States a lot, like it's just shops with strictly where it could be in a mall, it could be anywhere, and there's a hole in the wall. It's just perfume. That's all they carry.
Yep.
Right. And you go in and they have these little jars, like these salt shakers with these coffee beans in it to reset your breath.
Yep.
Right. Between sniffs. Is there anything that's offered to clean your palate between sips?
Not all of them. You may find, I find here in Ontario, there's not that many that do that. Some could have crackers, breadsticks, or basically plain bread or crackers is the best way to cleanse your palate in between. Most of them, I rarely see it here in Ontario unless it happens to be a place that's got a restaurant or something attached. But in other places, like down in Australia and in Europe, a lot of the wineries and stuff that we go to, a lot of them will have something. But it's usually, again, it's something like that, like very thin breadsticks or little pieces of cracker or something like if you want it. But it's not meant to be as a lunch or a snack. No,
absolutely, just to reset. But I'm just putting myself like I've never been to one of these tasting rooms, right? So, but I mean, I just find that like if I was in a tasting room or at an event, where there's other competition or other booths, or etc., that I would have a little something to say, okay, well, try this first, take this first, reset yourself, and then come try my product.
Correct. At events, we'll talk about that afterwards. There are more opportunities for that. At my classes and events, I always have food anyways. But even when I'm having a bare bones straight tasting, there will always be like plain baguette, some kind of bread or crackers. There'll always be that. And I'm always explaining to people to use that if you need to, because be different if I'm doing a progression or a complete vertical of a particular wine. So you're having that straight comparison where it's okay to have one after another, but again, having that palate cleanser in between does make sense. But I would just ask, guaranteed they have them. They probably just don't put them out so people don't clean them out.
Interesting.
Because people will tend to dump things in there. So if you're going from one winery to another, I would suggest always having like little snacks and things like that in the car. Right. There's nothing wrong with you having it in the vehicle and then just knocking on a breadstick on your way there. A couple of things, again, not overestimating how many tasting rooms you can get to in one day. So on average, as much as you get all excited because you have like one day and you think you're going to tackle like 8 or 9 of them, it's very rare. I managed to do 9 once, and that was the Raise the Bench event, and that was because it was a shuttle that was continually running. We basically went in, had one.
So you had no choice.
I was determined I was going to tackle all of them. It was a goal I set for the day. But on the most part, especially if you're the one, or if you're going to try all of them, so at that event, you're basically having 1, if not 2. Like I had 1 wine plus 1 appetizer at each place. Whereas when you're actually going into a winery to go into their tasting room to learn about their wines, you're usually having 3 to 5, if not more, wines. So to think that you can actually do that properly time after time, 8 or 9 times for a day is just not going to happen.
Right.
And usually you're going to need to have some kind of a break for lunch or something. The wineries open at between 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, depending on where they're located. So I usually estimate maybe 2 to 3 before lunch, have a lunch around 1 o'clock, and then maybe do another 2 afterwards. And then I give myself a cushion that if I'm still feeling up to having one more, I might push one more in before dinner. But most winery tasting bars kind of close around 5-ish anyways. Right. So that gives you time to go home and have a nap before you have to go back out for dinner afterwards. But usually 5 to 6 is kind of my benchmark, is the max that I will do in a full day. That's from the time that they open until the time they close, because I do like to actually spend my time. I want to savor everything I'm sipping. I want to linger, kind of learn, chat with the people behind the tasting bar, kind of get a feel of the place a little bit, because a lot of times the atmosphere too really lends itself to the whole experience, right? One of the other things I get asked a lot about is that, do you have to buy the products when you're there? I would say you don't have to. Like, if you went in there and there was nothing that you liked, you shouldn't have to feel, they never would force you to buy anything, and they don't expect it. However, you're encouraged to. Right. There's a lot of places that I go to where there's a really high pressure sales, but not to buy the wines, it's to buy their wine club.
Really?
So there's they have like a wine club type thing where you'll get shipped to you so many bottles per month. And so usually people who are pushing those get some kind of commission based on how many they sell, right? I mean, one lady at one of the wineries was downright pushy, like talking to people that she wasn't even serving because she wanted to get like another one for her quota for the month. So it gets to be a little pushy that way. But when it comes to the actual wines themselves, that's one of the reasons that you're there to sample them. And a lot of places, actually most places, will offer you a discount or give you your tasting for free because you bought something. Right. So there's a lot of that give and take. So if you're going to go in there and pay for a tasting, you don't want to buy anything, you've paid for your tasting, there's not any loss to the business necessarily. But if you like something, like, go ahead and buy a bottle, take it home. I mean, especially if it's only $15 a bottle. And if you end up getting your tasting for free, you basically just came out ahead, right? Or so nothing like coming home with you're basically paying for a bottle of wine to take home as opposed to just paying for your tasting.
Right.
So I would always say, take a look at what they're getting, even if it's something that you didn't taste that you know you're going to like or something like that. There's always wine themed things at these places as well. Like, you can get cool bottle bags and funny wine t-shirt. There's always like wine paraphernalia kicking around, right? And then the last thing people are always asking me is about tips. I've tipped in various ways. So if there is somebody that has gone out of their way to not just give me the standard tasting where they had some extra time, they saw that I was really enthusiastic about their wines, they have pulled out a special bottle here or two, like, here, this is not part of our tasting thing, but I really think you're going to like it. If they've gone above and beyond, and if I'm not buying a lot of wine, because a lot of times these places do also pay commission to the salespeople, depending on how much sales they do, of course. If they haven't, if they've gone above and beyond, and especially if I'm not buying a ton, then yes, I will leave some kind of a tip. But I've also done things where when we were in Nova Scotia last time, there was one lady who went above and beyond to the point where, like, she should have been closing and she stayed open longer for us just to finish, because she was so excited about showing us all their new product that I actually sent her a bottle of a Cabernet ice wine from here in Ontario, and I shipped it to her at the winery. She sent me cute little notes that she had it for dinner. And so, as much as I didn't necessarily tip there, she was a big fan of ice wine, and she's never had a Cabernet or red wine ice wine before. So I thought, as opposed to me tipping her there, for me to send bottles to her, she was very tickled to get that. So doing things like that are also a fun thing. Basically, just any way you can show appreciation really makes a big difference. And at the very least, if you're big on social media, go ahead and share your pictures, how much fun you had, the wine that you really love there. When you get home, make sure you thank them by thanking them online or something. The more publicity and the more attention that you're giving them publicly that way for doing a good job, they really appreciate that as well. So that's because it's not really people go into Yelp necessarily to check out a winery. Usually it's something like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, right? So you were talking about tasting events.
Yes.
So these are those big events where they have all the tables and all the producers. So I go to quite a few throughout the year. Some of them are more tasting type dinners where there's a winemaker or someone having a presentation, and there's a plated dinner with wine, similar to what I would do for my classes.
Okay.
Paired wines that way. And then there's other ones which are more, I call them the cattle calls. Those are the bigger shows down in Toronto, the Food and Wine Festival.
Okay.
Those ones are convention style masses. People go there to pre-drink before they go out for the night. It's not just wine, it's cocktails, it's beer. They're massive shows.
Wow. Okay.
And those ones, I guess the etiquette would be different depending on the venue. So those big conference style ones, doing the same thing again. There's a lot of people that are waiting to go and sample these things. Being the person that hogs the front of that table for 15 minutes that nobody else can taste any, you're not helping that business at all. Take your sample, step back. If you have any questions or whatever for the person behind the booth, feel free to go ahead and ask them.
Yeah.
And if you are not experienced at these kind of events, you'll notice very quickly whether that person actually works for that business or not. A lot of times there are, I hate calling them booth babes, but everyone who's gone to conventions knows that there's usually somebody, the owner of the business doesn't have anyone on that they can leave their business for to go and stand behind this table for the weekend. So they basically hire salespeople essentially, like retail personnel, to basically stand there and pour the wines and read the script. Right. So you'll be able to tell very quickly if they don't know what they're saying. Sometimes it's how they pronounce things, but you'll kind of get a handle on it. Those are the kind of things where I would take a brochure, ask for a business card. Sometimes they have business card sized almost like little tasting notes of the wine, so you can ask for those as well. But this way you're still getting the information without having to rely on standing there and asking questions. Those events fill quickly, as I mentioned, the bigger ones, so make sure you go early, especially if it's just like an open ticket type place where you buy tickets in advance and there's no seating or anything. By getting there early, you're going to get the best of the best. Sometimes most of these places, the wineries have only a set amount of wine there for the night or the day, depending on the venue. And when they're out, they're out. So unfortunately, what happens is you get these people who go to these events and they see the program, because you get a program when you walk in. They'll scan down it. They'll choose the wines or the wineries that they know are going to go fast because they are rare ones, special release, someone's brought them back, or they're like $100, $500 wines that you're getting a chance to sample that night. Those ones will go quickly. So if you go early and you go and stand in line to go and get those first, then you can relax for the rest of the night.
Cool.
And it's just because,
the odds of you remembering what you tasted.
And that's exactly it. So as much as I do a progression a lot of times with my classes, where the progressions are usually light to heavy, depending on what kind of tasting class I'm doing. On the other hand, if you are having, if you're just having a great night at home with friends and you want to have a really special bottle, I would always say never wait until the end of the night, because when it's your third or fourth bottle, it really is not going to taste as glorious as you think it's going to. So that's for the same reason when you're at these tasting events, to go to the bigger ones first. I said go against the herd would be my other ones. I mentioned cattle call. So if everybody seems to be going clockwise in the venue, you go the other way. So I'll do the same thing. So a lot of times the tables are laid out around the edges of the room, and then they'll have maybe rows down the center or a center square. So if everyone's heading left clockwise, you're laughing at me because you're actually picturing me.
I'm laughing because I do that at buffets.
It's exactly. Oh, you're not the guy that goes to the end of the buffet?
I'm the guy who goes to the end of the buffet and works his way to the other side.
Oh my gosh. Now everyone's going to kick you when they see you at a buffet. Okay, so don't do that at the buffet. Bad etiquette. But I usually go either on the round, or if anyone else is following and doing exactly the same thing, sometimes I'll do the center part of it first and then I'll make my way back. Or other ways I've done it, depending on the size of the venue, I will say I'm only going to do whites today.
Cool.
Or I'm only going to do reds. The very first time Norm and I ever went to a wine show down in Toronto, we did nothing but Chardonnay. We said we're just going to hit the entire venue because it was in a
makes total sense.
Big conference call, and we just know that we can't possibly consume everything that's going to be there and taste everything and enjoy it. So we choose something, and that's kind of what we do for the day. Yeah, and you know what? Most of those annual events, they're going to be back the next year, so don't make a big deal. Cool. Another tip I always have is about traveling light going to these events. I've seen ladies with the tote bags. I've seen them with shopping bags on wheels. I've seen them with the big purses and then like a backpack because they're going to go out after and they've got to change. The amount of people that are in this venue, like for you to have all these bags, there's no place for you to store it. Yes, there's a coat check. Even if you tried to coat check it, I would appreciate you do that as opposed to trying to clunk around and knocking people over with your bags. It's just not cool. The winemakers, as I said, sometimes the actual winemakers that are there themselves to talk about their wine, as opposed to you going in and saying that, I only like this. Especially if the winemaker's there, let them show you what their best stuff is and in what order you should be consuming it and tasting it, and let them decide on just basically it's, hi, tell me about your wines. What have you got for me today? And let them start the show. They basically just light up when you let them play. Do their job, for the same reason that when you ask a chef just to feed me without any direction makes them so excited, right? No, absolutely. So exactly the same process. So let the winemaker decide on what you're going to have. Right. I mentioned about playing dumb as one of my other tips, and that has to do with, again, letting somebody else talk and you listen. You're there to learn and experience, and by you doing all of the talking and you showing how much you know about that wine, it kind of takes away from the fact that you're supposed to be there to learn. There are sometimes breakout sessions and seminars at these places. So if you want to learn more about a particular style, a particular wine, there's always these little breakout sessions that are offered, especially in those larger conference style events. If you have the money and the time to do so, take advantage of them. Sometimes they're only about an hour and a half. Gets you out of the big crowd, and you're actually having a seated tasting. Sometimes they are led by master somms. Sometimes there's blind tastings. It's a lot of fun, but those are dedicated. I've seen basically a room full of somms together being hosted by a couple of master somms, and then there's this big debate going on about the wines, and it's been a fascinating thing to go to some of those. So if you really love learning about stuff and to see that level of wine knowledge in a room, taking the seminar is pretty fun. And then the last thing has to do with that bucket. Remember that spit bucket that I mentioned?
Do they have those at beer festivals too?
They have buckets everywhere. They should have them. The very first time I went to, there was one event that I went to for the very first time, and I don't think they were overly prepared. I think it was one of their first years doing it. They didn't have any buckets out, and I remember asking, because the idea that you're going to consume everything that's poured for you, and most of the time these places at these events, they're free pouring, right? They're not just giving you a quick ounce. Sometimes you'll get a splash in the bottom of it depending on the cost of the wine. And then other times they're just glugging, because the more wine you consume, the longer you stick around at their table, right? I get it. So you'll happen the same thing at a tasting room as well. Okay. But these buckets, just remember, people are dumping their glass in there and or they're spitting. So you standing nearby the bucket, you may get splashback. You may get wearing white is not always a good idea, or carry a Tide pen. Shout out to Tide pens. It's been a godsend for me most of the time. But essentially, it's a matter of going to the bucket, being courteous. You see, like, there's a crowd of people all basically ready to throw their glasses. You stay away from the bucket.
So Liz Lacey from Lacey Estates. One of the don'ts when coming into a winery: don't chew gum, don't drink coffee or smoke cigarettes, because that will affect how you taste the wine. Especially with gum, it makes everything bitter. That's one of the don'ts. In booking tours, it's always good to call ahead, because some wineries are smaller than others and can't accommodate. So if you have a large group of over 6 people, it's a good thing to come and book ahead of time. It's always good to share tastings as well if you're going to a lot of wineries, and drink water in between. So I think what else?
I was just saying on the way in, I'm not much of a sharer.
Not everybody is much of a sharer, but it's always good. If you know you're going to hit so many wineries, it's always good to kind of...
Oh, we share. We just don't share the wine. We share a cab.
Well, that's good. Always bring your ID with you because we usually check everybody. Usually everybody, if they look under 25, it's always good to do that.
So do you have any other questions? Not you ready to go?
No. So
You're-
would you
you're
say a
already
good
in?
tip for that is dip and dodge?
Dip and dodge.
Dip and dodge.
But it's surprising. I've seen, especially I go to, when it comes around, I'll go to the big Grand Bordeaux tasting.
Okay.
Usually happens, they just Montreal and Toronto every couple of years. And it's when the big Bordeaux releases come in. So these are all of the wine writers, winery professionals, somms are all in the room. And there's more spitting than sipping that happens in that. And the first time I saw it, I kept saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just like dumped that first growth." But that's it until you actually get an experience of it. And especially if you're there to actually learn and take notes and rate the wines, it's kind of hard to do that if you're, stumbling by after the first row.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, I guess, just being aware and enjoying the process without overly enjoying the process.
Right.
Does you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Certain venues, there's always a time and place for it. But if you get a chance to go down to, we're actually, you'll have to keep an eye on the Facebook page. We'll do some announcements. But I know that the girls and I were also talking about it, that we're going to create a calendar.
Sure.
And that's one of the ones we're thinking of heading down to one of the wine shows.
Okay.
Basically put us on the loose. Like we'll tie balloons in the back of our thing. And I think that'll be hilarious. So we can always find us.
Amazing.
So big thanks to all the winery friends in Prince Edward County for sharing their tasting room tips. So the wineries that participated today, if they didn't mention it in their little clips, it was Standers Vineyard, which is having some wines at the LCBO currently. Clausen Chase, as I mentioned, also has their wines in the LCBO. And then 3 others that are only available via their website, which is Broken Stone, Lacey Estates, and Trail Estate Wines. And all of the links are going to be in the show notes for you today. And of course, you can find it at stephaniepichet.ca/flavor52. Can't believe we're at 52 already. So all the 5 wineries, you'll have all of those there, as well as the direct link to the LCBO if you want to search out this Clausen Chase Chardonnay that we're consuming today. And yes, I will add in that winery for the Grand Bend winery that I was talking about earlier. It's going to bug me. I still can't remember the name of it. Talking and drinking at the same time usually throws me off for sure. Anyways, make sure to rate and subscribe us on all Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you're using, and we will chat with you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.